So how many of you have ever gone home after a long time away as an adult? Have you returned to the old stamping grounds, the place where you grew up? Or maybe the place where generation after generation of you have grown up? I do that every time I go back to Clive. My family is from Clive, Alberta. And I like to say that if you throw a rock in Clive, you will hit one of my relatives. Why? Everybody is related to me. Everybody. Either a Williams or a Rowley. It's funny. Between the two of them, we've covered the whole shooting match of the community. It's an interesting thing to go home because what a lot of people remember is not you in your current state. You know, maybe you've achieved a lot of things. Maybe you've had great success in your life. Maybe you've done a lot of interesting and amazing things, but all they remember is that little person you were when you were small, the person that they had to change your diaper, or that they had to help you through some accident, or they'll remember the time when you pulled that little girl's hair, and in your mind, in their mind, you're kind of stuck there for all the rest of the time. Even my dad, I have this. In my mind, my dad is 34, and no matter how hard I work, I can't get him to not be 34 in my head. Well, I'm 36 now. That doesn't make sense. And yet, in my mind, my dad is right back there where he was so long ago. Now, this actually has a way of keeping us humble, right? You know, you can go places and you can become very important, and there'll be people who cluster around you and they want to have a moment of your time, or they want to talk to you like you're someone significant. But going home will kind of knock that out of you. Actually, I have a friend who's in politics, and he says it's very good for him. You know, he's very important in his political role, and he will, when he's out there, have people. I actually went and saw him, and he has people bowing to him. And how can I help you? And what can I do? Oh, hello, hello, hello. And he's so very important. But he says, you know, it's so good to go home. Because he shows up at Old's Auction Market, and he sits down. I actually went with him one time, and I saw it. He sits down, and the lady behind the counter says, "You're not anything special, you know." And then proceeds to treat him that way the rest of the time he's there. He says, it's so good to be reminded that I'm just a person. This world is all about position and status, okay? This world is all about position and status. And who you are is everything. I was at this conference recently, and literally everybody was walking around trying to figure out who everyone else was, right? People would come up to you and they would talk to you and be like, "Hi, how are you? I'm so-and-so. Who are you?" And if you were, you know, someone very important, oh, wow, they would talk to you more. But if you weren't, which is me, then they would very quickly find that they had other things to do and go elsewhere. So you had a lot of very short conversations, because the goal was not just to know people, but to know the people who are important. And so they would find their way. And the world is like that, but the kingdom of God is not like that. Because how many of us are more important than anyone else in the kingdom of heaven? Oh, you're not? No, me neither. There's only one person who has any importance, and that's Christ. Everyone else is focused on Him, and He deserves that importance. But no one else does. And on the day that we're going to talk about, we actually had Jesus, God incarnate, God in the flesh, the Messiah, the Master of the universe, the one who controlled the universe by the might of His power and kept people breathing. And He returned to His hometown. So turn with me to Matthew 13, beginning in verse 53. It says, when Jesus had finished these parables, He went away from there. You remember we've just been through a period where He told a whole bunch of parables about the kingdom of heaven, where He spoke with great wisdom and understanding, where He healed the sick, He even raised a dead person. He had been doing amazing things all over the place and had people coming in droves to hear Him speak, to see this Messiah, to understand that He was the one that they had been waiting for. And now He came home. To the people who loved Him, to the people who knew Him, to the people that He had grown up with, to His hometown. And when He got to His hometown, He taught them in their synagogue. And they were astonished. And they said, where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Okay, so far, so good. Jesus came home and was teaching His own people, and they were amazed at what He had done, what He had said. They heard His voice. They heard the teaching that He'd given. They saw signs and wonders that He'd achieved, and they were amazed. He was legit. He was real. He demonstrated himself to them. So it wasn't like one of those traveling shows where they come, rolling up and promise you great things out of a snake oil, right? There's this old show called The Inspector General. I don't know if you've ever seen it. They're promising that, their snake oil can actually raise people from the dead and all these different things, and it's all smoke and mirrors and tricks. Well, Jesus wasn't like this. He didn't roll into town and then say, hey, I'm the Son of God, now give me all your money, and then take off. He stood there in the synagogue and he spoke to them and he taught them. And it was so powerful, so true, that they were amazed. He did signs and wonders so that they might know who he was. And they were amazed. And this is true for many of us. You can imagine his thoughts. He wanted probably all of his family and friends to be saved. Thank you. Above all else, he wanted the ones that were closest to him to know him. It's the same for us, right? When we have our family and friends, they're the ones that we care about most. If someone says, who do you want to be with you in eternity for all time? You're probably going to say, well, my family and my friends. Maybe Uncle Bill is going to be a squeaker. He's going to come in close, and maybe he'll have to negotiate with you. But you want the people that you love the most to be the ones that are with you and near you for all time. So Jesus went to the people that he'd grown up with. You can think about the guy down the road who was an older fellow that he probably spent time with in the carpenter's shop and got to know. There was a lady, who would come by every week and talk to his mom, and he would get to be familiar with her, and she would have changed his diapers and all the rest of that. All these different people, the kids that he played with in the streets when he was young. Everyone else that had grown with him and knew him, and he came to show them the truth. And it is true for most of us. We want our family and friends above all to hear the truth. But have you noticed something when you go to your family and friends and you try to tell them anything? Any kind of truth? At least it's true with me and my brother. Occasionally we've been known to fight. And to disagree on points. When we were kids, we would have a good dust-up about once a year. And I actually broke a hockey stick on it one time because we were fighting so much. I love him to death. Sometimes the death is getting pretty close. But he's one of the people that I care about the most in the world. And when there's truth, I want him to know it. Even though it can be so difficult, I want to do the work that he may get to know it. But sometimes family is the hardest work that we have to do because they won't hear, because you're just you. And who are you to tell me anything? What makes you feel like you're special? Why should you have any influence over us? They tend to be, in fact, the hardest crowd. And Jesus had this encounter. He proved himself to his closest family and friends. He showed his power and his wisdom. He demonstrated the truth, and they were amazed. And so they said, "Is this not the carpenter's son?" They were amazed at what he did. And then they got skeptical. They got questioning. Wait a second. Who do you think you are? You look really dramatic. You're doing lots of things. You're speaking these wise words, but aren't you the carpenter's son? Isn't your mother Mary? She lives just down the road. Aren't these your brothers, James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? We know these people. Are not all of your sisters still living here in this town? Where then did this man get these things? And they took offense at him. They looked at him, they heard what he said, they saw the signs that he did, and they said, whoa, 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 he's trying to pull a fast one on us. We know his mom. She's right there. We know his brothers and his sisters. They still live in town. And this Nazareth was a town of about 400 people. It was like a Cremona. This wasn't a big metropolis. Everybody knew everybody, and knew everything about everybody. And they're saying, hold on, Jesus, don't come walking into town pretending that you're somehow so important. You're trying to say you're the Son of God. We know you're the son of Joseph. We know you're the son of Mary. We've seen you since you were a baby. What are you trying to pull here? Who did you get this from? Who's the power behind the throne? Who's the man behind the curtain that's feeding you all these lies? How are you doing these great miracles? Well, someone must be pulling the strings, and we're not stupid. We know that you're just Jesus, and we're going to be quite offended because you dared to come into town and to say that we should do things your way. Remember, the message that Jesus was preaching was, believe in me and you will be saved. The kingdom of heaven is not like any other kingdom. There's only one requirement to be a citizen, and that is to put your full trust and faith in the Messiah, in Jesus Christ. And they say, hold on. You think that we're going to believe in you? You're just that brat from down the road. We're offended by that because you're saying we have to do it on your terms. Now, these were all godly people. They were going to the synagogue. They were going to church. And he's standing there saying, how you're doing it is going to change from here on out. You've got to do it my way. And they said, whoa, whoa, whoa. We've been spiritual since long before you were born. We've been good Jews since long before you were born. We've been walking with God just the way we were supposed to since before you were born. What gives you the right to walk into our midst and tell us that we have to do things different? We're going to continue doing things our way. Thank you very much. And they did not believe. They took offense at him. They doubted him. They didn't see what he was doing. They assumed he was scamming because they did not know his status. They didn't know who he really was. It actually kind of reminds me of a good Clint Eastwood movie I watched. Have you seen Pale Rider? Highly recommend it. It's got a pastor in it. It must be good, right? They call him preacher all the time. But here comes this preacher into town, and there's this mining company that's abusing people, and all their hands are picking on these poor, down-and-out guys who can't defend themselves. And one day, a bunch of them are trying to beat up one of these guys. And this preacher shows up and stands there with a stick of wood in his hand. And they look at him and they see a clerical collar, and they don't see anyone who's anything. And they decide that four of them can take him on. And he proceeds to beat the snot out of them and leave him in the dust. They didn't understand who he was because they thought they had a good read on him. 1 against 4 is even odds, and he's a preacher, and you know those preachers are a bunch of wimps, so what's he going to do? And that's the way it was with Jesus. They didn't see who he actually was because they were already sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, who he was. And nothing is different today. We love to place God in a box, don't we? We love to have him conform to our will, to our image of who he is and what he's going to do. We want a God that we can fashion in our own image because it's very convenient. If you've been coming to the Knowing God class, you've heard all about this, but what was the basic Garden of Eden sin? The devil came along and he said, hey, forget God. You can be your own God. You can have it your way. You can do it the way you want to do. You can stand by your own standard. You can make the decision as to what is good and what is evil for you. And that's a really compelling message. That's really exciting for me to be in charge. Right up until the moment, of course, when everything, the wheels fall off and everything goes south and we realize that my faith in me didn't really work and I'm actually not that great. But up until then, it seems great because you know what? I don't have to trust God. I don't have to follow God. I don't have to submit to him. I can do whatever I want. I can even call it God. This is our specialty as believers, right? Oh, yes, I'm a Christian. And I like this part of Christ, and this part of Christ, and this part. But I don't do these parts. They're unpleasant. They're uncomfortable. They're nasty. So I'm going to leave those off. But I'm still a Christian. Oh, yes, yes. I'm just doing it my way, and God supports me in that. Because he wants me to be able to have that choice for myself. And God comes along and says, that's not the way it works. I've heard so many times Nazareth-style language when someone comes along and they says, well, I could never serve a God who, and then follows it with X, Y, or Z. It really doesn't matter what. I could never believe in a God who would do this, that, or the next thing. Or God would never do anything that causes me to feel uncomfortable or make me change my ways in any way. Oh yes, I'm a good believer. And because I'm a good believer, he is going to submit to me. We actually were just reading in the Genesis class about how Jacob did this. You know, he came and he had this wonderful experience of God at Bethel. He had a dream where he saw the ladder going to and fro from heaven with angels on it. And God had just finished saying, I'm going to bless you, I'm going to give you all that you need, you're going to come after Abraham and all of that. And what did Jacob do in response? He said, well, if God does this, and God does this, and God does this, and God does this, then he will be my God. And I'll give him 10%. He tried to plea bargain with God. It didn't work, incidentally. But he tried to have his relationship with God his own way. And he had to go through a lot of ups and downs and actually get to the point of physically wrestling with God at the side of the brook Peniel before he finally clued in that God will not accept me doing it my way. God demands and expects that I submit to him, that I do it his way. Why? His way is the only right way. He built us. He's the dude that built the world. So when he gives us the owner's manual and says, here's how to live, and we say, nah, you don't know what you're talking about, we're crazy. And yet, we love to do it. I think I've told you once about the girl that I encountered who, she was a very sincere believer, and she said, you know, I just love Jesus so much. I love so much about him, but that lordship thing, I'm not interested in. He's not my Lord, I'm my Lord. And so I quietly turned to Romans 10 and handed it over where it says, if you confess Jesus as Lord, then you'll be saved. And she said, oh. And then thankfully changed her mind. But we all need to do that daily. Every time we approach the Scriptures, every time we approach God, he's doing a sanctifying work in us. He's changing us from who we have been to who he intends us to be. He makes us more and more into his image. He conforms us to Christ. And it can be hard. Why? Because the things that he has to conform to himself are all the bits that haven't changed yet. Now, I'm quite content with me, and I don't want to change necessarily. Usually God uses the method of just whacking me upside the head with a 2x4 because I'm slow and dense. But for each of us, God comes every day with conviction. Not with condemnation, not with attack, not with assault, not with judgment, but conviction that says, hey, what you're doing is sin, and sin is poison for the soul. Sin hurts, and I don't want that for you. I don't want you to be dying slowly inside spiritually because of something that you're holding on to. I want you to give that up. I want you to be free so you can live the life I intended you to live. That's what Jesus does. Jesus isn't about a bunch of random rules that he puts in place just to see if you can do it. You know, he doesn't make odd challenges for Christians. Hey, you need to stand on your head from 3 to 4 in the morning on Wednesday nights in order to be good enough for God. That's not what he does. But he says, if you want to live the way a human was meant to live, if you want to have the peace, the joy, the satisfaction, the health in your relationships, the richness in your walk with God that I intend for you, then you've got to give up anything that's not of me. That's the hardest thing we have to do. We end up right where the people of Nazareth are. We take offense because that's not comfortable. That's not easy. That's not nice. In fact, it will cause me to have to climb down and admit I was wrong. And I don't know about you, but I enjoy being right. Actually, I love doing the Myers-Briggs personality profile with people. Mine's an INTJ. That's one of the central things about my personality. I like being right. And I am right. A lot. And so it's really frustrating when I have to say, God, you're more right. I have to surrender. I have to stop being right because I'm wrong when it comes to you. And it's the same for each one of us. We have to give over to him. It's not easy. It does make us feel uncomfortable. One of my professors said, the gospel for you today is everything between these covers that you don't agree with right now. You've got to ask yourself why. And you've got to change. Because the people took offense. Now, his own people, his own blood, his own kin, the people that he grew up with, that he knew the most, that he was the closest to, they took offense at him, they denied him, they refused to believe who he was. That's probably worth like a lightning strike or calling down fire or something, right? What did Jesus do? How was his response? Did he attack them? Did he destroy them? Did he wipe them out for daring to deny who he was? He just said to them, a prophet is not without honor, except in his hometown and in his own household. Jesus had experienced this before already. His mother and brothers had come once to haul him away because they thought he was crazy. Already he had encountered people denying and not believing who he was. The people who were closest to him, who should have trusted him the most and been with him the most, turned and rejected him. It was nothing new. So he did not do many mighty works there, because they did not believe. They didn't want him around. So he said, okay. And this is the core of what happens to us. He saw that they wouldn't believe, and he took that pain. He opened himself up. He loved them. He valued them. He respected them. He cared for them. He knew going in they weren't going to accept him. But he went because he loved them. And he went without his armor in place, with no protection there. He didn't wall himself off. He didn't say, well, I'm going to self-actualize and cut out anyone from my life who's not valuable enough to me or who doesn't value me enough. He went to his own, and his own rejected him, and he knew they would. In fact, it actually prophesied that in Isaiah 600 years beforehand. And he still went. And he does that with us every single day. We take communion to remember that Jesus gave us everything, and that we have nothing apart from him. And yet Jesus did that knowing that on a day-to-day basis, we're not going to be faithful. We are going to sin. We are going to fall short. We are going to continuously take the perfect gift that he's given us and throw it in the mud. Why? We're human. We're stupid. And he loves us anyway. He never says, no, that was one time too many. He never says, that's enough and I'm not going to tolerate anymore. He always gives us another opportunity to come to him and surrender. But it's always on his terms. He never comes to us in a deal, in a bargain. He never comes to us and says, well, if you worship me, I guess I'll let you get away with this. But just not that. He says, this is my standard. And if you don't, we end up in the same place that they were. They didn't want him, so they didn't get it. Everybody else was experiencing amazing miracles, healings, people being brought back to life, people's lives being changed, the feeding of people who were hungry, the healing of not just physical things, but of souls. And in his own people, and the ones that he loved the most, they said, we're not interested. And so he left him. There is only one unforgivable sin. Did you know that? It's not saying the wrong words. It's not doing some sort of a really bad thing. It's refusing to believe in Jesus Christ. Why? Because all it takes to be saved is to believe. That's it. That's the only thing. If I look upon Jesus and all he did, if I see his signs, if I understand the truth of who he is, and then I say, no, I don't want him. He said, okay. And we don't get it. We get to be in all eternity apart from him. Just what we asked him. His own people even. If they didn't want it, they would get a walk with God, a relationship with Jesus. We may do it in the name of God, thinking that our way produces more fruit. We may turn away from Christ for whatever reason and say, I'm going to go my own way because I think my way is more spiritual. We may decide that we are stronger, that we're better, that we're able to do it on our own. We may turn desperately for our own healing or strength or salvation or help, but in the end, it will all be nothing apart from him. Because if we take offense at God, we get the results that we asked for. So Jesus showed himself when pride blocked people's sight. They saw the man they knew, and they missed eternal life. This world says that you can have life your own way. This world tells you that if you don't like God, then just change him. Make it more comfortable for yourself, or even just be your own God. Make your own way. The sin of man from the beginning was trying to be our own God, and nothing has changed to this day. That desire, that temptation is still in us to throw God aside and to say, I'm going to go my own way. Humanity has always struggled with giving over to God, but God will not have it any other way. He comes to us gently and mildly. But he comes to us saying, you have to come with me. His way is the only way. It says there that he did not do many works because of their unbelief. The only ones that were harmed when they took offense at God were those who had done that. When we contend with the Almighty, he always wins. Like I was talking about, Jacob spent all night wrestling with God. Not because God couldn't win, but because God wanted to prove a point. And at the end of a whole night of wrestling with God, God touched his hip. And he was done. He was out. He couldn't fight anymore. He tried as hard as he could to do it his own way. And nothing he did moved the needle one inch on him doing exactly what God chose for him. And the same is true for us. All right, are you ready for me to start meddling in your life? CCF. Is there any part of your life where you're taking offense at Christ? Is there any part of your life where you say, no, I'm not willing to go that far. I'm not willing to trust him enough? Is there any area of your life where you're holding something back from him? Is there somewhere where he's asking you to submit, to surrender, to trust, to believe in him? Now's the time to do it. We are never bigger, better, stronger, or righter than God. We can always trust him, always rest in him, always know total and complete safety and peace in him. His way is always best. The choice is simple. The Master is here with us right now. So for your life, each and every one, and I don't know what's going on with your life. I don't know what's going on in your situation. I don't know what is the desire. What's holding you back? You know, all of us in some way have it, right? That's the walk of sanctification. So as I'm talking to you, there's probably something that the Lord is just tapping on you. I know he is with me. Yesterday when I was writing this, I was like, oh, okay, Lord, here's a few things I've got to deal with. What's he doing in you? What's he saying? Give it up. Surrender. His way will always be correct. So will you surrender to him? Or will you take offense? Let's pray. Lord God, I'm so glad that you are always right, that you are always good, that you always love us more than we can love ourselves. I thank you that you don't come to us in lightning and thunder and judgment and crushing us, but you come gently, caring, and you show us yourself. I thank you that we can trust you in all things. And I ask that you would help us to trust you, to rest in you, to give you everything we have and hold nothing back. We praise you in Jesus' name, and we give you all the glory. Amen.